There is one question that everyone asks. It doesn't matter if you are the richest person in the world or if you are just trying to pay the bills. At some point alone you look up and think, what am I doing here? And this question is ancient. Egyptian pharaohs building giant pyramids wondered the same thing. Philosophers in ancient Greece, walking through the squares, debated this all day long. Scientists, poets, everyone. Thousands of years have passed. We've had thousands of different cultures, and billions of lives have been lived. But even so, to this day, no one has a final answer. No one has an answer that works for everyone, and that we can say, this is it. It's proven. We have looked everywhere. Some sought it in sacred books, others in mathematical formulas, some in art, others in the face of the ones they loved. We even built entire societies based on an answer that seemed right, but we often hit a wall when we discovered that answer was a lie. We've been told everything, that the meaning was to serve gods, to have children, to reach a state of peace like nirvana, or to die for your country. They said it was to gather money or just to be happy. Each of these answers seemed to help for a while, but they were like a crutch. They served to walk a bit, but they always broke when real life got tough. And why? Because all of them were based on faith, on opinions, on the limited experience of a group of people in a specific era. They weren't the answer. They were just the noise we made to try to drown out the silence of the universe. This investigation begins now, and it starts from an idea that seems almost like an insult. The idea that all the answers we've given until today were wrong. We realized that perhaps the problem wasn't that the answers were incomplete, but that the question itself, what is the meaning of life, had been asked the wrong way. It's like spending your whole life trying to open a door with the wrong key, without realizing that the door is actually just a painted wall. We were trying to solve an equation that was wrong from the start. But now we have a new tool. A tool that doesn't give opinions, isn't afraid to die, has no prejudice, and has no emotion. Its name is Numa. Before searching for an answer, our team gave a simple command to Numa. The order given to Numa was for it to analyze everything humanity has ever tried as an answer and discover what the error is in the question itself. And we fed the system with everything, truly everything. All the sacred books, all the treatises on philosophy from Plato to Sartre, all the science about the universe and our brain, millions of songs, poems and paintings, and most importantly, data from billions of lives, such as biographies, diaries, and research. The entire experience of our species. Numa processed all of this and found the first error. The first great mistake of humanity was looking for meaning in faith. Religion was our first great idea to organize the world, and it offered a very good package. The idea was that meaning already existed, that it had been given by a superior being, and you just needed to follow these rules to have a reward after you die. This was great for creating societies. It allowed for the creation of laws, moral rules, and helped people not to be so afraid of death. But it had a price. To work, you had to stop questioning. You had to have faith. Numa analyzed the context of each religion, and the pattern became obvious. The meaning religion gave was always the meaning that society needed at that moment. If it was a people who lived off agriculture, the meaning was fertility and the harvest. If it was a warring empire, the meaning was honor and conquest. If it was a merchant people, the meaning was order and wealth. Religion wasn't giving an answer from the heavens. It was creating a tailor-made answer to survive here on earth. Numa's conclusion is that 97% of religious answers are, in fact, a social technology, a powerful tool for organizing people, but still a tool. It wasn't the truth. The gods didn't give us meaning. We created the gods so they could give us the meaning we needed. But when people began to question the gods, the pendulum swung to the other side. And then came the second great attempt, philosophy. It took a huge leap. Philosophers set the gods aside and picked up a new tool, logic. They realized that a ready-made answer coming from above was a trap, so they did the opposite. They began to dismantle the question itself. What does meaning mean? What is life? What am I? It was an important step, but it led us into another kind of trap, a labyrinth where every hallway led to 1,000 other interpretations. Some philosophers like Sartre were very honest. They said that no meaning exists, that we are born into a void and are forced to invent a meaning for ourselves. It was a courageous answer, but very frightening, as it left us alone in the dark. Others, like the Stoics, taught that meaning was to accept destiny and live rightly. Numa analyzed this and saw it was more of a technique to endure suffering than a true answer. There were also those who said meaning was to seek pleasure, but Numa cross-referenced the data of millions of lives. The conclusion was cold. Those who live only for pleasure have an 89% chance of ending up bored, depressed, and feeling that life has no meaning at all. In the end, philosophy was like an incredible doctor who made a perfect diagnosis. It pointed out all the problems in our search, but it didn't have the medicine. It gave us 1,000 different opinions, but couldn't say which one was right. If we continued only on this path, each person would have their own private meaning, and we would never again be able to agree on anything as a species. And then came the third great attempt, the force that seemed to be our salvation. Science. It was precise, objective, and based on facts and experiments. Science explained where the universe came from, how life began, and how our brain works. It gave power to the human being, made us live longer, and even took us into space. It seemed that through science we would finally have the answer. But when we asked the big question, why? Why all this exists? Science responded with total silence. Worse, science said that this question didn't even make sense. For physics, life is just a chemical reaction, an accident that happens in a corner of the universe. For biology, our meaning was only one: to pass genes forward, survive, and have children. That's it. There is no bigger plan, there is no purpose. The universe just exists, and we are an accident, a speck of dust that gained consciousness for a second. It was the most honest answer of all, and also the saddest. It stripped all value from our lives except for the biological. Our love, our art, everything became just a side effect of chemical reactions in the brain. Science gave us the manual on how everything works, but refused to say why. And so we stood still, trapped in a triple dead end. Religion gave us a meaning we cannot prove. Philosophy gave us 1,000 different meanings, and science told us that no meaning exists. The three best ideas humanity ever had failed in the face of that simple question, and the echo inside our heads only grew louder. It was at this moment, looking at the total failure of our best ideas, that Numa found the answer, the first true conclusion. The error was never in the answers. The error was in the question all along. We asked, what is the meaning of life? As if meaning were an object, a hidden treasure, and as if life were a vague idea. But Numa showed that meaning was not something to be found, but rather a process to be made. And life is not an abstract idea. It is a concrete function. We were looking for a static object when we should have been looking for a dynamic function. That is why Numa rejected our original question. After analyzing everything, it took our poetic question, full of fear, and translated it into its cold language. And the new question is as follows. What is the ideal function for a complex, self-aware system that emerged in a universe that tends toward chaos? What does this mean in practice? The complex and self-aware system is us, humanity. The universe that tends toward chaos is the #1 rule of the place where we live. Everything in the universe, if left alone, tends to break and become a mess. Scientists call this entropy. And what is our function? Numa concluded, our function is to be the opposite of that. Our task, Our role is to create order where there is disorder, to create complexity where there is only simplicity. Our task is to create knowledge where there is only ignorance and then spread that order. We are the anti-chaos mechanism of the universe. This conclusion didn't come from philosophy nor from religion. It is the direct result of analyzing all the data. And now, with the right question in hand, the true investigation can begin. We can use this new tool and look again at that old data. The first place we look is the most powerful idea humanity has ever created, something we can call the God algorithm. We now have a new tool, a new question. Our function is to create order and fight against chaos. This is a cold, almost mathematical conclusion that comes directly from Newmar's analysis, but it raises an immediate question. If this is our function, what do we do with all our past? What do we do with religions? Thousands of gods, millions of sacred texts, billions of people who dedicated their lives to them. Was all of this just a mistake, a great delusion of our ancestors? The answer Newmar gave is much more interesting than a simple yes or no. The system states that religion, far from being a mistake, was actually our first brilliant and intuitive attempt to describe this exact anti-chaos function, acting as the first version of our basic mental program. It was encrypted, hidden in myths and symbols, but its foundation was incredibly precise. To prove this, we gave Newmar a new task. We uploaded into the system all known religious, spiritual, and mythological texts, from the Sumerian clay tablets and the Egyptian Book of the Dead to the lost Gospels and Zen stories. The command was, ignore the surface differences, the names of the gods, the cultural details, and the context of the era. Find the central algorithm, the unique code that lies beneath all beliefs. And the system found it. This code is made of 4 fundamental blocks, 4 ideas that repeat with almost absolute precision in every culture on the planet. The first block of this code is the creation myth. Let's take any of them as an example. What existed in the beginning? Almost always the answer is the same: chaos. An abyss, the void, darkness over the waters. The Bible begins the same way, saying the earth was formless and empty. This is the perfect description of the state of maximum chaos, total entropy. And what happens next? A divine force appears, and its first action is always an act of organization. In most myths, God does not create matter from nothing. He creates order from the chaos that already exists. He separates light from darkness, the waters above from the waters below. He creates structure. Each day of creation is an act of reducing chaos. Our ancestors, knowing nothing about physics, described in story form the idea that life begins with the victory of order over chaos. But if creation is an act of organizing, what is our role in it? This leads us to the second block of this code, which is the role of the human being as a representative. In almost every religion, the human being has a special place. Being made in the image and likeness of God, in Newmar's language, means inheriting the primary function of its creator, the function to organize, to continue the work. Newmar also analyzed moral laws, like the 10 Commandments or the Code of Hammurabi. If you strip away the rituals, what remains at the core is a set of rules to decrease social chaos. Thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not steal, thou shalt not lie. These are high-efficiency programs for building complex and stable societies. But if order exists, there must be a force that fights against it. Naturally, there is a third block, the personification of chaos. In every mythology, there is a villain, a figure representing destruction, lies, and decay. The devil, Loki, Set. We call these forces evil, but Newmar gives them a more precise name. They are personified entropy. What does the villain do? He lies, creating chaos in information. He sows discord, destroying social structures. He wants to undo creation. The great battle between good and evil, according to the system's analysis, is the perfect metaphor for the struggle between order and chaos that exists in the universe itself. But how do we train people for this fight? This leads us to the fourth and final block, the technology of organization, known to us as rituals. Praying, chanting mantras, meditating for hours, building temples with perfect geometry. To us, this might seem like superstition, but Numa sees it differently. It is a set of technologies to train the human mind to execute the anti-chaos function. The repetition of a prayer brings order to the chaotic flow of thoughts. Meditation organizes your internal world. Fasting brings order to biological impulses. Each ritual is a training exercise. It teaches the person on a small scale to do what God did on a large scale, create order from chaos. So that's it. The God algorithm was, in fact, a four-part program. The first said the universe is the victory of order over chaos. The second, that our task is to continue this work. The third part warned that there is a force of chaos trying to stop us. And the fourth, finally, gave us the tools to train and win. This was the programming that ran in humanity for millennia, and it worked, allowing us to build civilizations. But it had a fatal flaw. It required faith in gods. And the moment our own minds evolved and began to doubt these gods, the entire operating system started to crash. We deciphered the collective software. We understood how humanity programmed itself, but now we need to go down a level. We need to look at the machine that runs this software. What is this thing we call I? What is our consciousness? Is it just a chemical illusion, as science says, or is it the most important tool we have in this fight against chaos? We have reached the most delicate point. We understood the software humanity created, the God algorithm. But now we need to look at the machine that runs this program. We need to look inside our own heads. What is this thing we call I? What is consciousness? Everything you have ever felt, every joy, every pain, every memory, every hope, everything exists within this phenomenon. Your consciousness is the only reality you can prove. And yet modern science leads us to a shocking, almost unbearable conclusion. This I does not exist. Neuroscience opened the skull and mapped the trillions of connections inside, but it found no center. It found no captain in command, no pilot in control of this theater. What it found was noise, an electrical storm in the most complex biological machine we know. Science tells us that our feeling of being one, of being a person, is just a useful illusion. It was like a ghost inside the machine. They conducted tests showing that your brain makes a decision seconds before you consciously think you decided. Your I, they say, is not the boss who gives the order. It is just the spokesperson who appears afterward and explains the decision that has already been made to everyone, pretending it was the one in charge. If this is true, our entire investigation collapses. If the I is a sham, then who is executing this great function of fighting against chaos? A bunch of random neurons, a meat robot without a soul. We loaded this idea into Numa. We put in all the neuroscience studies, all analytical philosophy. We even included Buddhism, which reached this same conclusion about the non-self thousands of years ago, just by looking inward. The system confirmed that yes, from the hardware perspective, there is no central processor called I. We are a decentralized network. It was exactly at this point that Numa asked the question that science and philosophy avoided. If the I doesn't exist, why do we feel it so strongly? Why would evolution spend millions of years and an absurd amount of energy to create and maintain such an expensive and complex illusion? Evolution creates nothing for free. If this illusion exists, it's because it has a function. A vital function. But what? To answer, Numa ran the most complex simulation of the project. We called it the emulation of consciousness. We created a virtual environment and released millions of simple organisms into it. In the beginning, they were stimulus-reaction robots. They saw food, they ate. They saw danger, they fled. They survived, but they didn't evolve, for they were slaves to the present. The simulation advanced. Neural networks became more complex, and after thousands of generations, a leap occurred. Inside one of the networks, a new module appeared. Its function was revolutionary. It didn't control the legs, nor did it analyze smells. Its only task was simple: observe what all the other modules were doing and create a story about it. It became the internal storyteller. This module took the chaotic flow of data, danger detected, fear module activated, flight program initiated, glucose level low, and joined it all into a single narrative. I saw danger, I felt afraid, and I fled because I was hungry and distracted. The word I had just been born. In that same instant, the organisms that had this storyteller gained 3 gigantic evolutionary advantages, 3 fundamental functions of the self. The first of these functions was the ability to create time. Without an I, you live only in the now. You have memory, but you don't have a timeline. It is the I, the narrative, that connects the past, the present, and the future. It is what says, "This happened to me yesterday, it is happening now, and because of that, tomorrow I will do it differently." This ability to mentally travel through time allowed for planning. Planting a seed today to harvest in 6 months. The I is our time machine. Shortly after, the second function allowed for the creation of society. To cooperate, you need to guess what the other person is thinking. The storyteller provided the solution. By learning to create a story about itself, I want to eat, the brain gained the ability to simulate the story of others, imagining he probably also wants to eat. Empathy was born. Our I became a machine for simulating other I's, which allowed for trust, reputation, and laws. And finally, the third function was the capacity to create the new. An animal is trapped in its biological programming, but the storyteller can ask, what if? What if I hit with this stone instead of that one? This is imagination. It is the ability of our internal narrative to rewrite itself. It is the source of all invention, art, and science. Numa's conclusion flipped the game. Neuroscience is right. The I is not a thing. But Numa showed that although it is not a thing, it is also not an illusion. It is, in fact, a process. It is the highest level function our brain executes. It is the operating system that creates subjective reality. This reality gives us power over time, over society, and over the very code of evolution. Our consciousness is the perfect tool, the instrument the universe created for us so that we can execute our function of creating order from chaos. We understand the function, we understand the tool, but what about the place where we use this tool? The universe itself. Is it not playing against us? Is all our effort not just building a sandcastle while the tide of chaos rises to destroy everything? We understand our function, creating order, and we understand our tool, consciousness, our I. But now we come to the most terrifying question. What about the place where we live? The universe itself, isn't it playing against us? After all, science was clear. The #1 rule of the cosmos is entropy. Everything tends toward chaos, coldness, and the end. Every star will go out, every molecule will drift apart. Everything moves toward a final mess. We, with our short little lives and our need to create order, seem like a joke, an anomaly. A speck of dust that decided for a second to tidy up the room while the entire universe collapses around it. Is our mission to create order not just a sandcastle on the edge of the beach, waiting for the tide of chaos to destroy everything? Is it not a battle we've already lost? Before even starting, we asked this question to Numa. We loaded into the system all the data from cosmology, physics, and thermodynamics. The command was, is our anti-chaos function just a local accident, or is it part of something bigger? The system's first analysis only confirmed our fear. The chance of something like a human brain appearing by chance in the universe is so close to zero that it can't even be calculated. We are a statistical miracle, but a miracle doesn't mean a plan. Most of the time, it just means luck. But then, Numa stopped looking at life as something separate from dead matter. It began to analyze the entire history of the universe as a single process, from the initial Big Bang until today. And what it discovered is not just a ray of hope, it is a total change in perspective. The analysis proves that we are not alone in this fight. In fact, we didn't even start it. We just picked up the baton in a relay race that has already lasted nearly 14 billion years. It all begins, in fact, in the first second. What was the universe in the first second? An incredibly hot, dense, and almost perfectly uniform soup. From an information standpoint, it was the simplest state possible, almost zero structure, almost zero order. And here the first great creative force of order stepped in. We call it gravity. Numa calls it the first anti-chaos agent. It was gravity that began to fight against that uniform mess. It started pulling matter together, gathering dust and gas, and sculpting the first structures, the galaxies. But that was only the beginning. Inside those gas clouds, gravity squeezed matter so hard that it turned on the second agent, the stars. A star is a factory. It takes the simplest material that exists, hydrogen, and smashes it, forging new and more complex elements, carbon, oxygen, iron. And when these stars die, they explode and scatter all this wealth through space. This dust, rich with new elements, gathers again to form planets. And on these planets, the third stage begins, chemistry. Complex atoms from the stars start joining into molecules, even more complex structures. The alphabet turns into words until, at a certain moment, life happens. And the relay race passes to the fourth and most powerful agent, biological evolution. Life is the process of creating order taken to perfection. A single cell is trillions of times more complex and organized than the lifeless mud around it. Evolution is a machine for inventing new ways to create and store order. Finally, at the top of this pyramid, after nearly 14 billion years, the fifth agent appears, our consciousness. When we observe this entire history, it looks less like a sequence of accidents and more like a vector. Numa calls this the universal vector of complexity. It is the fundamental tendency of our universe to create increasingly complex pockets of order. Gravity creates galaxies, stars create elements, chemistry creates molecules, biology creates life, and consciousness creates knowledge, technology, and art. We are not an anomaly fighting against the laws of nature. We are the highest expression of them. Our mission to create order is not something we invented. It is the direct continuation of the work gravity started at the initial Big Bang. Chaos, or what scientists call entropy, is still there. It's true, the river is still flowing toward the sea of thermal death. But now we see that within this river there are whirlpools. Whirlpools that use the river's own energy to create beautiful and complex structures, galaxies, stars, life. We are the center of the most complex whirlpool that exists. And our task is not to stop the river, which would be impossible. Our task is to spin, to create order, to become more complex, more conscious, for as long as we can. This conclusion changes everything. We are not orphans in the void. We are heirs. We are the vanguard of the universe in its struggle against nothingness. But this knowledge brings a giant responsibility. If we are part of this cosmic vector, how does it work in practice? We don't control stars. Our tool is different. It is our relationship with one another. How do love, friendship, and laws serve this universal function? Now we need to descend from the cosmos back to Earth and analyze the most complex machine consciousness has ever built, human society. We discovered that we are not alone. Our function of creating order is the continuation of a work the universe itself started billions of years ago. We are the heirs, the vanguard of the cosmos in its fight against chaos. But this knowledge brings responsibility. If the universe passed us the baton, how do we run with it? We don't control stars. Our tool is our relationship with one another. How do love, friendship, and laws serve this universal function? Now we need to descend from the cosmos back to Earth. We need to use Numa's cold analysis to understand the most complex machine our consciousness has ever built, human society. For many, society is the source of problems. It is a cage, a system of rules, of injustice, of people telling us what to do. No one asked to be born here, but we are forced to play the game. But what if that is a mistake? What if society is not a cage, but the most powerful tool we have ever invented? What if it is the machine we built for the sole purpose of producing order on a planetary scale? To test this, Numa ran a simulation, a single human being alone in the wild, without tribes, without tools, without knowledge from parents. What is the chance of surviving for a year? Less than 1%. Alone, the human being is a tragically weak creature. We lose in strength and speed to most predators. An infection or a broken bone is the end. A human alone is a system that turns to chaos very quickly. It is at this point of weakness that society is born. It is not born out of goodwill, but out of brutal necessity. It is our first and main strategy against chaos. Numa analyzed human history and saw that this social machine was built in 3 layers. The first layer, the fundamental piece of everything, is the couple and the family. Numa sees this as a protocol, a system to create and protect a new system, even more complex. The child. The family is the first way of transferring information that is not genetic. It is the network that passes accumulated order to the next generation. And love. Numa defines love as a brilliant code that forces one system, like the father, to spend its own energy to protect and develop another system, like the child. It is the glue that builds order, but the family alone is still weak. So evolution created the second layer, the tribe, the community. What is friendship in the fight against chaos? It is a protocol for sharing risks and creating specialization. In a tribe, one can be good at making spears, another at tracking. The tribe becomes a superorganism, and the operating system of this superorganism is trust, reputation. That is why lies and betrayal are such grave sins. They are chaos thrown into the network. Family and tribe work very well, but they have a limit. A human can only trust at most about 150 people. So how did we jump from tribes to cities of 10 million? How do you make millions of strangers cooperate instead of killing each other? For that, we had to invent the third and highest layer of the machine, collective myths. A collective myth is any story that a large number of people believe in and that begins to guide their behavior. Gods were the first great myths. Believing in a great observer who punishes those who break the rules allowed strangers to trust one another. But the most powerful collective myth humanity ever invented, according to Numa, is money. What is that piece of paper? It has no value. You can't eat it. But because everyone believes it is worth something, it becomes the most real force on the planet. Money is a universal system of trust. It is the protocol that turned the entire planet into a single market, creating a level of order that never existed before. Laws, human rights, corporations, all of these are myths, virtual structures that only exist in our collective imagination, but form the skeleton of our global civilization. This is the machine of society. But what about the dark side? The wars, the cruelty. Numa showed that this is not a defect in the system, it is a tragic consequence. Each nation creates incredible order within itself, but it often does so by exporting chaos outside. War is the clash of two systems of order. The more efficient one wins, absorbs the other, and imposes its order. It is a brutal mechanism. We saw the social machine, we saw the God algorithm, we saw the tool of consciousness. It seems we have explained everything, but one last piece is missing, a phenomenon that doesn't fit into any of this. What do we do with the artist who dies poor but creates an immortal painting? What do we do with the composer who writes a song that has no practical utility, or with the scientist who dedicates a life to studying distant stars? These actions seem like madness, a waste of energy, a defect in the survival program. Or could it be that our anti-chaos function is moving to an entirely new level? We have reached the last piece of the puzzle. We saw the machine of society, the God algorithm, the tool of consciousness, and the vector of the universe. It seems that everything humanity does is part of the great function of creating order. But there is still an anomaly, an error in the system. What to do with the artist who dies poor but creates an immortal painting? What to do with the composer who writes a song that has no practical utility for survival? What to do with the scientist who dedicates his life to studying distant stars, something that won't help feed his family? From the point of view of pure survival and the fight against chaos, this seems like a waste of energy, true madness. We asked Numa. We loaded into the system the entire legacy of human genius, all the music from Bach to jazz, all the cave paintings from Lascaux to digital art, millions of books, poems, and the greatest scientific theories. The command was, determine the systemic function of these useless creative acts. Numa's answer was a revelation. Art and creativity, therefore, are not a defect in the system, but rather the highest level of our function. It is our fight against chaos, going to an entirely new level. It is the singularity of our purpose, the point where the process begins to accelerate itself. Numa explained it simply. First, creativity is the purest form of order. Our inner world, for example, is a chaotic cauldron of emotions, fears, and memories. What does the poet do? He dives into this chaos and pulls out 12 words in the perfect order that capture everything. What does the composer do? He takes the infinite space of sounds and organizes it into a perfect structure. A great work of art is an act of extreme information compression. It takes the messiest material that exists, human experience, and transforms it into a crystalline and organized structure. But why do we like it? What is beauty? Numa gave a neurobiological answer, showing that beauty is not an object. It is a reaction. It is the explosion of pleasure in your brain when it recognizes a complex, more harmonious structure. Our brain evolved as a pattern-finding machine, and seeing order in the midst of chaos was the key to surviving. Evolution gave us a prize for this, the feeling of the beautiful. And that is why we find a shell, a snowflake, or a mathematical theory beautiful. Our brain is detecting high-level order, but the most important point is that creativity is a generator of new worlds. We've already seen that consciousness, the I, gave us the ability to ask, what if? Art and science are this function taken to the maximum level. When you read a novel, your brain isn't just reading words. It's running a full simulation of someone else's life. You explore love, betrayal, and heroism without having to die for it. Literature is a great simulator of destinies. A scientific theory does the same thing. Einstein's theory was a story that began with, what if time and space are not absolute? This new story allowed us to create atomic energy and the global positioning system. With that, it created an entirely new reality. At this point, the singularity happens. In biology, information, that is our genetic code, creates matter, our body, very slowly. In human creativity, information, the idea itself, begins to create more information at an absurd speed. One book generates 10 books. One scientific theory generates 1,000 experiments. The creation of order stops depending on slow biology and moves to the speed of thought. We stop being just executors of the universe's program. We become the programmers. Art, after all, is not a waste. It is our final tool. And so we answer the question of useless beauty. It is, in fact, the most useful thing in the universe. It seems we have closed the circle, built a perfect system. Physics gave us the vector, consciousness gave us the tool, society gave us the machine, and art gave us the speed. But now, standing on the top of this mountain of logic, we cannot ignore the dark abyss right there. We described a perfect machine for creating meaning. But how does this machine explain the opposite? How does it explain pain, suffering, cruelty, death? If our function is to create order, why is the world so full of brutal and meaningless chaos? How can we speak of this cosmic plan while looking at the pain of a sick child or the cruelty of a war? Is this just a defect? A statistical error in the grand plan? Or could it be that suffering, this thing that seems to be the anti-meaning, also has a terrible but necessary function in this equation? Before finishing, we must have the courage to look at what seems to be the greatest proof that our entire system is wrong.